in the government is just ridiculous. And it's time for individuals, business owners, high-income W-2s, investors. It's time for us to become financially literate so that we can work on our own individual financial freedom. Because here's the thing, the most important freedom to fight for is financial freedom, because it leads to all of the freedoms. It leads to the freedom of healthcare, it leads to the freedom of mobility, it leads to the freedom of education, it leads to the freedom of security, it leads to the freedom of choice. Financial freedom, by far, is the most important freedom to fight for. And that's why I've been doing what I do on social media. I jump onto social media on a regular basis, and I try to elevate financial literacy. I try to talk about the things that other supposed financial gurus are putting out there for you to believe to be true regarding financial matters, regarding tax, regarding business structure, regarding asset protection, you name it. And I address it. Why? Well, I'm a lawyer. I specialize in tax, estate, and business law. But I'm also a serial entrepreneur. I own a variety of different companies, most of them in the financial space. I own a private wealth management firm. I own an accounting firm. I own a fractional CFO company. I own a tax firm. Plus, we own real estate, residential, commercial real estate. And I'm saying all of this not to be braggadocious, but to demonstrate to you that I'm academically trained in the languages of business and money, and I have actual real-world experience putting that knowledge to work in life, right? I actually do this myself, and I've been helping business owners all across the country do it for nearly 3 decades, right? So there's a lot of tenure here. And the reason I'm sharing all this the way I am is because I believe that the key to financial literacy starts with understanding the rules of the game. Right, understanding what the landscape is that we're playing in, right? So understanding the rules are critically important. And there is a significant rule change that is about to happen, right? And it has to do with something called the Big Beautiful Bill. How many of you have been seeing news information regarding this bill, whether it's been on social media, whether it's been on traditional media, whether it's been at the local hangout spot with your friends talking about it? I'm just kind of curious. One of the things you may not know about me, I don't know if you guys have done any research into who I am and what I do, have like searched me up on social media, searched me up on through Google. If you have not, let me tell you, I am the world's foremost expert on my opinion. So I share it pretty often. And I have a lot of opinions regarding what is taking place with regard to the Big Beautiful Bill. And it really does hearken to 2 things that I personally have been adamant about. First is my distrust, dislike, disfavor, if you will, to government. Right? I'm absolutely 100% an individual who stands juxtaposed to pretty much everything that government does, because I believe that most of the activity of government is really invading into our individual rights. I do understand that there are aspects of government that are critically important for society to function. I totally get that. I just don't like the corruption that exists therein. Now, I don't believe, and because I'm not naive, I don't believe I am going to be any individual that's actually going to change that reality, right? It just is what it is. And I don't think one person, at least not this person here, is going to be able to change it. What I do believe, though, is that we can create the opportunity for absolute freedom within ourselves by working and striving towards financial freedom. And that's why I position the things that I position the way I position them, because I genuinely believe that if I can help enough individuals become financially free, become amazing stewards of the wealth that they're creating, that will actually change society for the better, because if I can get enough people together that are financially free, then those individuals are not dependent upon the government in order to save them. And I believe it's possible for anyone to become financially free. Now, I recognize it's not necessarily going to be easy, but it's possible, right? Why can I say that? Well, I've become financially free. I didn't come from money. My family had to work really hard just to get up to the poverty line. Now, I'm not saying my situation was the worst that ever existed, right? There are way more people out in the world who have had way worse situations that they've had to suffer through. I totally get that. So I'm not trying to say my rock bottom was the worst of all, right? But it was mine, right? I lived through some pretty horrible times financially, and with a lack of financial awareness, that itself caused a snowball effect of challenge. What I did recognize is that If there is a solution that others have found, well, that means it's possible. And I can reverse engineer the steps in order to get there. And part of that reverse engineering the steps is understanding the rules of the game that we're playing in. And again, there is a landscape change that is about to happen with regard to tax legislation that's important for you and I to really understand what this is going to mean for us and how we could potentially leverage it to our individual benefit so that we can individually work towards financial freedom. And then collectively, as a financial free ecosystem, right, we change the world for the better locally, right? Because that's the reality. If you can improve your locality, that over time spreads across the country. Right. And when I'm talking about improve it locally, what do I mean? Well, if you're a business owner and you're keeping more of every single dollar you make, you then get to deploy those dollars in a variety of ways. You could deploy them toward helping your own family, providing for means of support for your family, creating opportunities for others, hiring, right? Improving the end result for the clients that you serve, the customers that you serve. Your local constituents, your local community, all of those things benefit as business owners improve their scenario. At least they have the opportunity to benefit. And if you're an amazing steward of the wealth, well, then that stewardship actually improves society. And that's why I do what I do. And again, the big beautiful bill is this landscape changing type of tax legislation. And the reason I say it's landscape changing is because absent that tax legislation, things would drastically change at the end of this year, because the current law that exists with regard to taxation here in the United States essentially expires on December 31st, 2025. And starting on January 1st, 2026, we revert back to what it was prior to 2018. See, that's the law that actually changed the landscape of tax last. That was called TICJA, the Tax Cuts Jobs Act. That law modified a variety of things and was really aimed at benefiting those individuals who are contributory to society, right? Individuals who are business owners, who are investors, real estate, et cetera. But that law over the past number of years has started to modify to the point where at the end of this year, it sunsets. The president, like him or hate him, regardless of your position on it, he made certain campaign promises during the campaign. And part of that process is now him trying to realize through his party in Congress, both the House and the Senate, try to realize some of those promises in the form of legislation. Now, I personally believe that the legislation does not actually accomplish a lot of the things I would have liked it to accomplish. Right. And one of the biggest contentions I personally have is that the legislation as proposed by both the House and the Senate actually adds to deficit spending over the next 10 years to the tune of about $3.8 trillion, which is a lot of money, right? And I actually was hopeful that they would try to cut spending because I think that the spending that the government does is absolutely ridiculous, right? I just believe that in my core. But when it comes down to this environment, we have to understand, well, what's actually happening? Like, again, campaign promises were made. What does that actually mean, and how does it translate to how things happen? Congress is our legislative body. Congress is the part of our government that actually creates law. And in the congressional ecosystem, there are two chambers. There's the House of Representatives and there's the Senate. And earlier this year, the House of Representatives essentially got together and they figured out how to put onto paper this embodiment, if you will, of some of the campaign promises with regard to tax legislation. So they passed a bill called the One Big Beautiful Bill. They passed this bill in the House of Representatives. And the way our government works is that bill then moves to the Senate. So the House of Representatives passed it, and then the Senate picks it up, takes a look at the version, reads through it, and then they start to debate and argue and try to figure out what they would agree to. And the Senate, at the end of last weekend, finally, because they've been debating, considering this for a while, they finally came up with their version. So they voted on their version of the One Big Beautiful Bill. But there's that means there are two versions. There's the House of Representatives version, and then there's the Senate version. Now, what this means is in order for a bill to potentially become law, it needs to be signed by the executive branch, the president of the United States. But the president can't sign two different versions of the same bill. So what has to happen now is, since the Senate has passed the bill, their version of the bill, it goes back to the House, where it currently is. And the House then starts discussing and trying to figure out whether or not they can vote on the Senate's version of the bill. And that's a process that has to be done, right? Because again, they have to consolidate this into one version that gets presented to the president. So yesterday, the House really debated a lot. They talked about a lot of different things. And they finally got to a point where they agreed, and then they had to issue something called a ruling. They had to vote on a rule by which they're going to accept the votes for this particular Senate version of the bill. And that's where things got stalled. Again, I'm not trying to give you guys a civics lesson, but I think it's kind of interesting to understand what's actually happening right now. The House of Representatives, all day yesterday and into the wee hours of the morning, were discussing a lot of things. And they started requesting a vote on certain rules that they would follow for the final vote on the Senate bill. So it was more of an administrative thing that had to happen. But what was interesting is there was not enough yay votes, and the House Majority Leader just kept the vote open. So when votes are happening, there's a clock on it, right? They have a clock with regard to how much time everyone has to actually cast their vote. But not enough Republicans, to the tune of about, I think it was like 13 at my last count, would not vote on it. They either voted no or they didn't vote at all. And that meant that there was not enough votes to approve this administrative thing. Not even, it wasn't about the bill itself. It was just about an administrative matter that was necessary before they could vote on the bill. There was not enough that happened. And it was stalled. So the House Majority Leader kept the voting open, even though the clock had run out. And he's allowed to do that. Like the House Majority Leader is definitely allowed to do that. And during that time, while the vote was kept open after the clock was running, I'm sure there was a lot of back and forth. Now, no one has yet reported, at least not that I've seen, what deals were made behind the scenes. But eventually, at about, I think it was about 3:30 this morning, because I was watching this unfold live, the House finally was able to get enough votes to pass it. Right now, there's 535 members of the House of Representatives. They had to have a majority to say yes, that they would approve this rule. And then what happens is, after that approval, there's this thing called the Magic Minute, which is sort of like this this opportunity for the House Majority Leader and the House Minority Leader to say a few words, right? They're granted this special privilege to be able to talk. And again, this is more of like an acceptance thing. It's not an actual rule. It's not a requirement under the Constitution. Congress itself just says, the House of Representatives says, we're going to do this. So what happened is, usually this magic minute is only a few minutes long. Sometimes we've seen a magic minute last a couple hours. But it was interesting because the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, just started talking. He's been talking for hours. Normally, again, the magic minute is only a few minutes, maybe an hour. It's been 3 hours plus that he's been talking. And remember, this is only with regard to the administrative issue, the rule. It has nothing to do, meaning the vote and the issue, has nothing to do with the actual vote that has to happen to approve or disapprove of the Senate version of the bill. But that's what's happening right now. It's sort of like this concept of a filibuster, right? The House Minority Leader is just talking, and he's permitted to talk as long as he wants to, right? So this is an interesting thing that's unfolding. But here's the heart of the matter. No matter what, the House has enough votes, meaning the Republicans, to pass this bill. They have enough votes. So as soon as the theatrics are done, which regardless of when, as soon as he stops, they're going to move on to the vote. And there's enough votes in the House to pass the big, beautiful bill. So what does this mean for you? Well, there's a lot of things in this bill. A lot. There's things that address farmland. There's things that address healthcare. There's things that address taxations and tax rates, right? There's things that address businesses and business ownership. There's things that address investment real estate. I'm going to talk about just a couple things that I think is important for individuals who want to work towards financial freedom, things you need to know about what's about to happen with our tax landscape. Now, here's the thing. The concept of taxation, I believe to be not theft. I think it's extortion, right? The IRS has guns. But nevertheless, it is the law of the land. So you need to learn the law of the land so that you can operate within the context of the law, but to your advantage, right? If you know the rules, you can play to win. Now, what happens a lot on social media, these financial gurus get out and they talk about are sound bites. And they sound really good until you understand that there's way more to it than a soundbite, right? In order to get outcome, you need to understand how to apply the law to your specific circumstance, right? I talk with because we counsel and we coach and we consult with business owners all across the country, real estate investors all across the country, high income W-2 earners all across the country. We talk about aspects of how we apply law to circumstance. We talk mostly about things like tax reduction strategies that are both legal and ethical, asset protection strategies that are designed to help you safeguard the dollars that you're keeping, right? Keeping them protected from all the enemies at the gate, the creditors, the litigants, the opportunists who all want a piece of your pie. And then ultimately, how to ensure that those dollars that you've kept and protected, how to ensure that they go to the people and the causes that you care about, not to the government, right? So legacy planning. Because I believe that the real measure of winning at the game of business is not simply making more money. Winning at the game of business is creation of generational wealth. If you create generational wealth, to me, I believe you've won. Why? Because now your money has not only supported you, it now is available to provide opportunity for generations to come. And then you have a say in how that happens. So I talk with our protege members, our elite members, our university members all the time about how do we take the law and apply it to the situation. Well, the big, beautiful bill is essentially saying the existing landscape with regard to tax rates is going to stay the same. Remember I said earlier that it was supposed to expire at the end of this year, 2025, December 31st, 2025. And it was going to revert back to what it was prior to 2018, which would have meant tax rates pretty much for everyone earning more than about $70,000, $75,000 a year or so. Everyone would have seen their taxes go up, regardless of who you like politically, right? It's a lot of junk that's being bantered about on traditional media and even social media by both parties, right? But the reality is, if you actually look at how the tax ecosystem is, the vast majority of Americans would have seen their tax rates go up. Individuals who make a lot more money would have seen it hit them a little bit harder, but it would have impacted a lot of individuals. So the fact that the big, beautiful bill is going to keep the existing landscape, relatively speaking, intact with regard to tax rates and tax brackets, that means that for most individuals, just in that aspect of the tax code, there's really not going to be much of a change. But there are some provisions that do improve lives for business owners and real estate investors. Let's talk about the business ownership aspect first. There's something called qualified business income, right? And there's this deduction that is now available, created under TICJA, right? The Tax Cuts Jobs Act. This ecosystem where there was an attempt to try to level the playing field between corporations and small business owners, right? Corporations and small business owners. So corporations in the United States have a flat tax that is imposed on the corporation itself. And then after that tax is paid, if profits are distributed to shareholders, those profits are then income taxed to the shareholder, right? So the corporation pays a tax, and then distribution of profits, that gets hit with an income tax as it's received by the shareholder of that corporation. A lot of people like the corporate flat tax environment because the flat tax rate is pretty darn low, 21% right now in the United States. So that means if a corporation, a C corporation, earns $100,000 of profit, they pay a tax of $21,000. It's a flat tax. It's 21% flat tax. And the remainder, $79,000, it could stay in the corporation. They could use that money in order to reinvest and to enhance the corporation. It could be distributed to the shareholder. Again, it's a decision that gets made by the owners, I should say, of the corporation. But regardless, that flat tax is pretty darn attractive, especially when compared to other corporate tax rates around the globe, right? 21% is pretty reasonable. It's not the lowest that exists, but it's definitely attractive. However, small business owners, which really comprise the majority of what actually happens in the United States, there are about 33 million small businesses in the United States right now. And that number of small businesses control nearly $14 trillion of revenue generation, right? So we're talking about a sizable sum of businesses that generate revenues, right? But there was really not a super preferential tax system for business owners prior to 2018. You dealt with, because most of those businesses, those 33 million businesses, are pass-through in nature. They essentially pass the income tax from the business to themselves, and they personally report all of that income on their personal returns in some form or fashion. But regardless, there's a disparity. Corporations have the preferential flat tax ecosystem, and small business owners have the ordinary brackets, right? The traditional brackets, all the way up to currently 37% at that top bracket level. So TICJA came about and it changed things. It gave this opportunity for small businesses to receive a deduction off of the top relative to the profits that business, that small business generates. And the deduction that TICJA put into place was a 20% deduction from profit first. So the company, again, $100,000 of income from a taxable standpoint, $100,000 of taxable income. Right off the top, $20,000 is a deduction. So it reduces the taxable income by $20,000. And that was pretty darn attractive. Now, it doesn't apply to every single business out there. There's some caveats, some businesses that are not permitted to use QBI deduction. But for the most part, this did create an environment where a lot of businesses were truly excited. They were like off the charts, like, yes, finally, the government's starting to see us as really a value to society and giving us a benefit, not just these large corporations. And again, that's pretty darn attractive, right? 20% deduction right off the top. A lot of you would love the opportunity to take 20% off, but how many of you would love to take 23% instead? Well, that's what the big beautiful bill is going to do. The big beautiful bill is going to take that QBI deduction from 20% and raise it up to 23%. Again, you may not say that 3 percentage points is a lot, but on $100,000, it's an extra $3,000 of deduction. And for many business owners, that could be the equivalent of $1,200 of tax savings, in the pocket savings. What would you do with an extra $1,200? Again, it doesn't sound like a lot, right? Like $1,200, right? But it's $1,200 of your own money that instead of you giving it to the IRS, you get to keep it. Who wouldn't be interested in that? I hate the IRS. I don't want them to get a single penny more than they absolutely have to. This modification under the One Big Beautiful Bill creates an opportunity for small business owners to level the playing field even more with the large corporations that exist out there. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that the large corporations also have some problems, and I think they get way too much, in my opinion. But this levels the playing field. The 33 million small businesses out there, the vast majority of them are going to have this opportunity to take advantage of an increase in the QBI deduction, which is going to put dollars back in their pocket, dollars that they can go out and use to either reinvest in their business, hire additional employees, go through the process of maybe investing in real estate, investing in other businesses, investing in themselves, right? It's your money after all. And instead of giving it to the government, you get to keep it because of this modification of tax legislation. That in and of itself, I think, was a pretty significant component to the Big Beautiful Bill. Again, the reality is the House of Representatives has enough votes on the Republican side of the spectrum to pass the Senate version of the bill. Now, here's the reality. Let's assume for a moment that they do go to the floor to vote and it doesn't pass. Well, what that means is it's going to create something called a congressional conference, which is going to be comprised of a couple members of the House and a couple members of the Senate who have to get together and formulate the bill. Like they have to negotiate back and forth with regard to figuring out one version that would go to the president, right? So the reality is, again, I believe that there's enough votes right now in the House of Representatives to pass the Senate version of the big, beautiful bill. And I believe that this will play right into the media objective of the executive, where you're going to see an opportunity for the executive to essentially sign this tax legislation on July 4th. Like, think about the metrics of that. Like, that is definitely going to play right in to the politicization, if you will, of tax reality. And there's a lot of sound bites that are going to come from that opportunity, like cutting taxes and creating opportunity, right? Again, there's so much being bantered about with regard to this tax legislation that this is going to create a great opportunity for the President of the United States to sign a bill on July 4th having to do with cutting taxes. Because that's essentially what is happening in this bill. It's cutting taxes, not for everyone, but for some certain groups of people that actually are going to, I believe, be able to benefit society, right? Because if more business owners are keeping more of their money instead of sending it to the IRS, which I believe just simply creates an opportunity for the government to misallocation of capital, because again, the government doesn't make money, it takes money and then redistributes it. I have big problems with how it chooses to do that most of the time.